Can you spray worm tea on old worm castings to basically wake up the microbe population? We're going to cover that on today's episode of Coffee and Compost. My name is Steve Churchill and I own the Urban Worm Company. So the funny thing about vermicomposting is that most people want to start vermicomposting in the spring, which is the same time that they want to start using worm castings. So I've got sales data from the Urban Worm Bag and the website analytics from my own site that tells me that pretty much the peak of the interest in vermicomposting occurs basically March, April, and the first part of May. And so the issue with this is that if you're just starting vermicomposting, it's going to be several months before you are able to harvest a reasonable amount of worm castings. Whether you're using my product, the Urban Worm Bag, or a Hungry bin, or even just a Rubbermaid bin, you're looking at 4 to 6 months before you've got anything that you can use. And so this is a little bit of a problem. So the end result is that most vermicomposters end up with worm castings well after the spring planting season is done. And unless they're planning to amend their soil with worm castings in the fall, which is a great idea, then they end up storing their worm castings often through the winter until they want to use them again the next spring. Sometimes these worm castings are stored out in the open. Maybe they're exposed to UV light. Maybe they got too dry. Maybe they are not with a food source. Whatever the case may be, it is likely that months-old worm castings aren't going to be of the same quality of the ones that you just harvested. So I see this question a lot, especially in the fall, and it's kind of understandable. People want to know if they can use aerated worm tea with that vibrant microbe population to kind of wake up dead or dying worm castings. Now first, unless you're one of the few people who knows how to use a microscope to judge a microbe population in worm castings, you may truly not know what's going on. You may actually have a pretty decent microbe population still going in your worm castings. But let's say that you know that your microbes are dead or dormant in your worm castings. There's two questions we have to ask. One is why is your microbe population not doing so hot, and will worm tea fix it? So let's handle the first question. Your microbes are going to need the same thing that you do. You need air, you need moisture, you need a food source, you need protection from the elements. So if your worm castings aren't doing so hot, or I should say your microbes in your worm castings are dead or dormant, let's try to fix that problem first. So now for the real question, will adding worm tea help? Well, if your worm castings issue were that they got too dry, then sure, adding worm tea is going to help, but then again, so would just adding water. But this is the important part. Those microbes that proliferated in your worm tea did so because you gave them oxygen, you obviously gave them water, you gave them a food source, often in the form of molasses for some folks, and then other folks like a slower food like kelp meal or alfalfa. Regardless, you have got billions of microbes now in your worm tea, and they are mouths to feed. So adding more microbes to your worm castings that couldn't support the old microbe population doesn't make sense. So let's look at it this way. If a pasture can't support the cows it has, the last thing you want to do is add more cows. So if your worm castings are languishing because of a lack of organic matter, let's say it's been consumed already, adding billions and billions more organic matter consumers in the form of microbes is not going to help the situation. So while it may seem intuitive that adding microbes in the form of worm tea will help fix a lack of microbes, what you need to do are fix the reasons why there's a lack of microbes in the first place. So keep those worm castings covered. You want to keep them moist. You want to keep them oxygenated. You want to keep them out of the way of UV light. And I would also recommend adding an organic matter source like dead leaves or compost or manure, something that's going to feed those worm castings and prevent them from going dormant in the first place. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful. I hope you hit the subscribe button and see me on the next episode of Coffee and Compost.